hand it over to Jason Owen-Smith. He's a professor of sociology at University of Michigan and executive director of IRIS.
Hi there. Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate the introduction, and thank you, Rissa and President Schovanec, for joining us today. My name is Jason Owen-Smith, as Dan said, and my brief today is to introduce IRIS, just to provide a little background for understanding the partnership that we've had the opportunity and the pleasure of developing with CPUPC and with the group of Texas universities that we've been working with. If you could move to the next slide, please, Dan. So IRIS itself, the Institute for Research on Innovation and Science, is approaching 10 years old, and IRIS is formally an IRB-approved data repository housed at the University of Michigan that is the anchor for a national consortium of research universities who share data and provide resources to create an infrastructure that helps us understand, explain, and we hope improve the public value of academic research in higher education. And we do things the way we do in large part because we believe that the academic higher education sector as a whole will benefit from well-curated, professionally managed data and from a central infrastructure that is, for lack of a better term, university owned and operated. And so IRIS is fundamentally an academic organization governed by an elected board of directors from our university membership and dedicated to working with our institutional members and with researchers to do the work of really understanding how it is that institutions like ours make such significant contributions to our nation and to the world. Next slide, please. When institutions join IRIS, we ask them to do a bunch of things, and we'll talk a little bit at the end about what exactly it takes to join, and you'll hear a little bit more from Rissa and President Schovanec about their particular experiences of working with IRIS. But we think that joining IRIS, the core activity of which is drawing administrative data that your institution already creates in the course of its daily business from HR, procurement, and sponsored projects systems, in order to share them with IRIS under strict data protections. We think that that has significant value both for individual institutions and for higher education, and we think the nation as a whole. And those sources of value include improvements to the data. Kevin Bjorn, our technical director, is on the panel with me here. He's just waved at you. And when data are submitted to us, a team of technical experts led by Kevin does extensive work to clean the data, integrate it with that from other universities, and to link it to more than 50 external data sources, which provide a wide range of additional information back to the institutions that are participating about everything from the career trajectories of people who are paid on grants to business information about the vendors and subawardees that work. IRIS also takes those data and creates from them campus-specific reports. These are generally interactive dashboards that are served to your campus through a secure web portal that allow your institution, without having to have the technical expertise to actually write the code to work with the data, to work through and understand some of the ways that your research activity, what the data is about, have an impact on your state, the nation, your faculty, your students. In addition to this work, one of the core activities of IRIS and its role as a data repository is that we take the data from all of the universities that participate and all of the linkages that we make, and we create from it de-identified secondary data for research purposes, which we make available through a secure virtual data enclave under a data use agreement to researchers around the country, along with research support and privacy protection capabilities. IRIS member institutions faculty and students, their affiliates, are allowed free access to that data for their own research purpose. And thus far, more than 500 researchers from around the country, from more than 150 institutions, have accessed those data for their work and produced more than 100 publications in a wide range of fields. So there are already three really important things, but I think what you're going to hear about today, and what for me is sort of the true and enduring value of this kind of model of collaborative work among universities with a platform like IRIS, is the value of aggregation, of taking data from many different institutions and bringing them together in a secure fashion that is controlled by the institutions themselves, that allows us to powerfully demonstrate not just what one institution does, but what groups of institutions do, and ideally what the entire higher education and research sector does. And it's that type of aggregation that allows us to see things that might be very difficult to see and understand with data from a single university or from the perspective of a single university. It's also that kind of aggregation that allows us to really make the case to key constituencies, for instance, state legislatures and federal legislatures. Next slide, please. I won't spend a ton of time on this, but just to give you a sense of the current scale of the data, our current research data set, which was released in 2022 with complete documentation, includes information on nearly 500,000 sponsored project grants, about $107 billion in sponsored project spending, which includes information about more than 790,000 people who were paid wages on those awards and who did the research work. Next slide, please. Those data have been used for a variety of things, some of which point to really interesting directions that the kinds of aggregate reporting that we're beginning to do can help with. So for instance, this is a recent paper that got a lot of traction that was published in Nature. It used IRIS's data to dig into questions about which members of research teams, defined as the people who were participants and paid on grants, ended up authors on papers associated with those grants. And it demonstrated a lasting gap and set of inequities between male and female students, particularly in whether they made the transition to authorship, right? This and other kinds of studies, including some work we're doing with NCSES, the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, sets up possibilities for really beginning to dig into and understand what's coming to be called the problem of the missing millions, the question about how pathways into and through graduate training in STEM fields do and don't support the careers of diverse faculty and scholars. Right? And the idea here for aggregation is that it's often very difficult to understand with appropriate privacy protections what's happening to groups that on a single campus may be fairly small, but with aggregation across many campuses, we can really begin to understand and to begin to see how different policies, different procedures, different programs have positive or negative effects. Next step, please. Which brings us to the sets of reports we're going to do. I won't spend a ton of time on it, except to say that IRIS membership involves both sharing data, research access, having improved data. IRIS members also receive a set of reports that come back to them. These reports are developed by us in collaboration with our members, by Kevin's team, and they include a set of 9 standard reports that range from our spending profile report, which documents sort of the workforce on your campus that is grant supported. One tip: many more students are supported on research grants than many institutions think, including many more undergraduates, a story that we don't tell often as well as we can. To the business and economic impact of vendors, the later careers of students and others who are employed on grants, and a set of reports that are designed primarily to make the case in government relations about state legislatures and federal legislatures. Next slide, please. We've also increasingly been doing significant work, both in the biomedical sphere around the clinical Clinical Translational Science Awards, CTSA hubs from NIH, and a broader early career researcher report about using these data to help understand faculty development and career trajectories, both for the purposes of reporting and for the purposes of mentoring. Next step, please. But what we're here to talk about today, again, is the power of aggregation. And so you can see the ways in which bringing together data from many different institutions both might allow you to see and understand phenomena that are hard to see at a single institution, but also may allow you to tell stories and to demonstrate the value of activities that by definition span the work of many institutions. So all of these reports are designed and implemented in a fashion that allows them to be aggregated across all IRIS members, across subsets of IRIS members, by geographies, by regions, by institutional communities of interest, with different goals and use cases. And so what you're seeing here is an example of some of our government relations reports that aggregate together data from Texas participating universities to demonstrate some of the impact on a particular congressional district in Texas, right? This is the sort of thing that a government relations officer could take to a staff person, right? You could also do these for individual campuses, but in some cases, in states like mine, for instance, where appropriations bills often speak initially to an entire swath of universities, it's often worth doing this in the aggregate. Next slide, please. And I won't spend a ton of time on it, except to say each of our individual universities also makes use of these data. So the data don't just end when they arrive on our university's campus. Part of our goal in building the products that we build is to create them in a fashion that allows people who are not themselves deeply technically oriented, communicators, government relations officers, and others, to use the data and explore them in a fashion that makes it possible to tell compelling stories, as well as just providing statistics, right? And so this is a set of use cases. These were actually published by the University of Michigan, I think, yesterday. Dan, right? So this is out of the spending report that we deliver to our university members. The University of Michigan's Office of the Vice President for Research, their communications unit, put together a press release and an article in the University of Record and a very nice YouTube video, which I think, Dan, perhaps you can drop the link into chat, that outlines some of the impact of the university on the state's economy, drawing both on IRIS data and on data from the university's technology transfer office, which is called Innovation Partnerships. Those two things together went out to a listserv as part of a newsletter that reached more than 90,000 individuals. And I think I mentioned earlier, I unfortunately have to step away a little early to give a talk based on this to our Board of Regents, because they saw and were interested in this story of impact. And so this is one of the ways that you can see a single university making use of this. And this is not an isolated case. The reports that universities receive come packaged with, from work that Dan and communications at IRIS does, communications packages, template press releases. We also do a lot of work to help make it clear how you can tell these stories. Next slide, please. So that's the brief overview, quick look at IRIS. There's more that could be said, but I think what's really important here is to note that the core goal of IRIS is to provide that platform and to bring together data and communications and research in a fashion that allows us, higher education institutions, the power to tell our stories, right? We think there's a lot of value for individual institutions to join this, and we depend on our individual institutions and are governed by them. We ask our institutions to provide data, to provide contacts. We currently ask our institutions to make a contribution of $25,000 a year to help support the infrastructure that makes all of this possible. However, beyond the value to an individual institution, of which we think there is significant value, There is dramatic value in aggregation across institutions, nationally, regionally, at the state level, and we believe across groups of kindred institutions with similar missions and similar concerns, with whom we're very happy to work, to try to use the data to make a particular story clear. And that's what we've been trying to do. In a way, I'm very, very pleased to have been part of with CPUPC and a group of their member universities. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rissa and President Schovanec.
Well, thank you, Jason, for that overview. President Schovanec and I have just provided a few comments to go with your presentation. And Dan, if you would go to the next slide, please. Our overview and our slides include an introduction to CPUPC, the relationship we have with IRIS, and then President Schovanec will give a few remarks, and I'll close with some remarks from our university representatives. As an introduction to CPUPC, if you would, Dan. We are a 53-member organization of the public universities and health science centers with our system chancellors and 3 state two-year colleges. Our community colleges in Texas and our private institutions are not members of CPUPC, but we are just cover a wide range of research interests in our campuses, and CPUPC members meet regularly to talk about issues and trends in higher education. President Schovanec, as chairman, set a goal of talking about the value of higher education and how our institutions can help contribute to those discussions. And he also focused on promoting the value of university research. And that's what led to our relationship and exploration on IRIS and the data analyses that they do. So next slide, please. As you can see, late last year, we started having conversations. 7 universities agreed to sign up and start the process of learning what IRIS does. And they joined Texas A&M, which has been a longstanding member of IRIS. I skipped there. So I do want to say that what's been told to me is that the MOU process and the data transmission process take some time to work through, and that what I've been told is IRIS staff has been very helpful in making that happen smoothly. So next slide, please. These are our current CPUPC IRIS members and participants, and you can see in that lower corner, we've got room for more. So that's what we're looking forward to. And then next slide. We'll introduce President Schovanec.
Thank you, Rissa, and thank you, Jason. I think if you were to look at the dashboards we all keep, especially as it relates to performance metrics connected with our research enterprise, you're looking at research expenditures, whether it's total or federal, publications, citations, things of that sort. And we derive that information from places like the National Science Foundation, HERD Survey, Scopus, Web of Science, our own Office of Institutional Research. But what that kind of data fails to convey, I think, is a point that Jason made, the impact of what our research is. We talk about that probably as we speak to alumni, as we speak to legislators. We want to make sure we're conducting research that makes a difference for our state, our region, and so on. But what you get through IRIS is that data in a way that we don't usually find it. And I think that conversation is just one dimension of the broader discussion related to the benefits of universities and higher ed. And that's an important discussion today, the ROI that we provide. And so this information, we've used it in the last session as we spoke with our regional legislators. This was, I believe, somewhat of a legacy session for higher education in the state of Texas. And that came in many forms, but for us, the possibility of establishing a Texas University Fund would be transformational. And I was just visiting with some state legislators this week, and every one of them said to me, if this constitutional amendment does pass, and we're confident it will, we will be watching and observing the impact of this investment. And I believe the kind of information you get from IRIS will be an essential part of how we make the case for the benefit of their investment in the research enterprise in an entity like the Texas University Fund. But beyond that, I think what we get from IRIS is very useful in our conversations with the local economic development councils in our cities and business members and so on. Going forward, here I'm just giving the perspective of what we might do at Texas Tech. Being a Carnegie R1 and with increased revenue now through the investment of this last session, obviously we want to attain the characteristics of that next class of research schools at AAU. And so that information for IRIS will inform us as we benchmark our performance against these other schools. But I think for other institutions on this call, maybe you're an R2 and you want to become an R1. The information you get from IRIS is a way to really, it's another perspective of looking at your performance and setting your goals and visions. But I do think in the most immediate benefit, though, is the impactful nature of research. And as Jason said several times, aggregating all that information makes a powerful statement, probably more impactful to legislators than what we can necessarily just convey by citing what we do at one institution. Okay.
All right then, Dan, next slide, please. So the next couple of slides summarize conversations that I had, again, with our CPUPC members who are participating with IRIS. Research vice presidents of research, our governmental relations teams, chiefs of staff in the offices. And this is some of what they said to me. And I think, as President Schovanec said, some of our regional universities chose to join IRIS, not because they have a big research enterprise now, but because they want to grow and they want to track that growth, and they want to track it through metrics beyond the traditional measures of research. And they believe IRIS will do that for them. And so far, they're happy with those results. And again, it's not just tracking the economic impact of your university, but also from the economic impact perspective of research. And as President Schovanec said, several universities have presented their data to legislative members, to staff members, to chambers of commerce to try and tell that research story. And they do plan to continue to use the IRIS information on things like grant applications. So next slide, please, Dan. I called the previous slide first steps because those were our universities that were participating kind of with one or two data sets, maybe just the vendor profiles or something. They also have, IRIS offers another higher level, I'll call it higher, but it's a more complex level that involves deeper and bigger data processing. And the schools in Texas that have gone with this option are still in the process of providing their data and working it through with Kevin. But they're really excited about what they've already learned. So the first process and thing related to that would be the integration of the data, working with the data definition set that IRIS offers so that all definitions, all data on campus are working together and aligned. And the process of synchronizing that data also has brought together different departments on those campuses to work together in the same direction to get the information to IRIS, but coming to a less controlling environment related to their data silos as referenced here. So these campuses are very much appreciative of the opportunity to move forward as a university related to research and the data. But they definitely stress that having the president's commitment to make this kind of data lift is very, very important. So next slide, please. Looking ahead, as President Schovanec said, the possibility of using IRIS data for our Carnegie classifications discussions, for maybe including it in our SACS reviews, looking at other ways where research is referenced, that the IRIS data can be applied to those conversations is something that our Texas campuses are very, very excited about. And then I think I will conclude with that bottom bullet that I heard from both university presidents as well as our VPRs, that they really feel that this information provides that dashboard where they can look at research growth in the whole enterprise and where the institution is going forward. And keeping with the theme of this conversation in the webinar, as more and more Texas institutions join IRIS, we'll have a stronger foundation for using that data to look at the impact by region or by university system or by type, if it's our general academics or our health institutions. So we're very much looking forward to expanding those relationships and working with IRIS. Thank you.
Thank you. Here is some contact information that I'll just leave up. We don't have any questions right at the moment, so I was thinking maybe, not to put you on the spot, Kevin, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the process of uploading data to IRIS and how we can help people with that process.
Sure. Well, so before we jump into that, let's talk about what kinds of data go into building this data set that's used. From the universities, we ask for administrative data that falls into a few different categories. One is procurement data. So this would be the transactions, purchases of buying the equipment and paying for the services that support research on your campus. Another category of data that makes up this data set is the employee data. So who are the people on your campus that are working on these research projects? Faculty, staff, students, anyone who participates in the research endeavors. And then finally, some award data. So information about the types of awards that are being funded on your campus, the funding agencies, the types of research, the schools, colleges, or departments that are receiving the funding, things like that. And then we take that administrative data, ingest it through a secure web portal that we maintain. So your university has access to a secure web portal. You log in, you upload data through that mechanism. And then we take it and do a bunch of magic with it on the back end to merge it with a variety of data sets, including data from the US Census Bureau, data from data vendors that we work with. Moody's, the ratings agency, provides us a wide range of business data across North America, as well as Stepping Blocks, a company out of Atlanta, Georgia, that provides us data on outcomes of people, and then a whole slew of other data from publications to patents to publicly available federal data, as well as other places. So we take a lot of time, we merge all that data, we harmonize it across all of our member universities, which allows us to do things like benchmarking and comparisons and aggregations, like the CPUPC aggregation that you saw a little bit earlier. And then we also, in addition to the reports and tools that we provide our members that are sort of the immediate return on investment, there is also access to the underlying data that we put together. So researchers on your campus, faculty, students, as well as institutional researchers from your IR department or other places on campus can gain access to this micro level data that's been all linked together. And you can see everything that underlines all these reports, as well as produce your own metrics using this data, which Jason had mentioned several researchers do across the country for different publications and whatnot. So that's high level data talk there.
We have one question that just came in. If a university has already invested in a research impact assessment and benchmarking tool such as SciVal, is it possible to ingest or combine with IRIS data as well? And can IRIS be ingested into an institutional RIMS system?
So I can give a short answer to that question. There is not a plug and play ingest into, for instance, SciVal's GUI interface, but the data are very complementary. Every single IRIS report comes with the capability to download the underlying data for every table and figure in CSV format, and many of our universities do download and either rebrand that for their own purposes. So we routinely see universities take those data and use them in new ways, for instance, in their colors or to emphasize different fashions. We also see them import them into their Tableau dashboards or RIMS systems. Where we do see them integrated with other data products such as SciVal or academic analytics is not in the SciVal or academic analytics data themselves. It's when the universities make use of those systems APIs or other data pools to create their own dashboard products for their analytic purposes. And there they can integrate the data in that fashion. We are in sort of almost every instance working with our members to try to figure out what the next highest value thing to try to do with them is. And part of our challenge is to make sure that we continue to do the work that we need to do that is our core while growing in the directions our members need. This is one of the things that's been mentioned several times, but we have not yet taken the step to make that more plug and play.
Jason, if I could add something to that, I think we use SciVal, used to use academic analytics. What you report with those tools is in some ways quite different than with IRIS.
Mm-hmm.
And you can customize the information from IRIS depending on your audience. If you're talking to a local economic development authority, they want to know how many vendors might be benefiting from research expenditures from the university. When you do an economic impact study and you cite a multiplying factor, it doesn't mean that much to people. I don't think they grasp it. But when you can show them how many vendors are benefiting from the research enterprise, it takes on more impact. When you're talking to a legislator, they want to know what's going on in their district. So it's very complementary, as you say, and we haven't integrated those tools and this information, but maybe in time we will, because we're really relatively new to this. But it sends a very different story, and in some ways it's almost more meaningful, but it has to be, I think, adjusted to the audience.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you're absolutely right. One of the founding principles of IRIS was that we wanted to focus our attention and to have our data structures set up so that the data focused very heavily on understanding basically not just spending, not just dollars and documents, but the businesses and people that were doing the work that spending allowed, and that were doing the work that produced those documents and that research, and setting up systems that would allow us to follow both out of the university and into the larger society, which is how we believe the true impact of university research particularly can best be seen and explained.
Anything else you'd like to add, Jason?
I think the major thing I'd like to add is, the recognition, which I think I tried to say, but may not have been entirely clear about, that IRIS is a community that is growing in several ways. It's growing both in terms of who participates the universities that are involved. And it's growing in terms of the ways in which we make use of these data, both for reporting and through the integration of research with the reporting. And so one of the things that I think is incredibly powerful here is that the same data that can be used, for instance, to tell the story, as President Schovanec suggested, whether you're talking to a legislator or a chamber of commerce, is exactly the same data that a researcher might be using to develop a new model of economic impact that doesn't rely on a multiplier. And so to the extent that we can translate more quickly the best academic research about the ways in which we have impact on the public, the ways in which research is done, the ways in which academic careers progress, the better we're going to be able to make use of these data and the better we're going to be able to tell our stories. And I think that's one of the things that for me is among the most interesting and the most valuable of being part of this community, is that I think it really plays in key ways to the strengths of the academic community. And so for that, I think it's essential to think about representativeness and engagement, and again, the power of aggregation. And I see a question here. Have there been efforts to recruit HBCUs and other minority serving institutions? Are there any particular obstacles to participation that those institutions face? We have made some efforts, and we're making more and more progress with minority serving institutions. We have not yet had an HBCU member. One of the challenges that some of those institutions face is that many of them are primarily undergraduate facing. And so it is often more difficult to create the kind of data that we want. For instance, if you don't have a full sponsored projects office, the challenge of creating the data falls heavily on staff who are already, often overburdened. One of the things that we think is necessary here is we really believe that data sets like the one we're constructing absolutely need data that represents HBCUs and regional institutions and the minority serving institutions. But we also understand that the value proposition for those individual institutions of participating may not be as strong as it is for a larger, more research intensive institution. And so the challenge there is to collectively make the case that the public good aspects of IRIS and of understanding and explaining how our system of higher education works benefit from this to funders like the NSF, for instance. And that's another thing that we do through the research mechanism and through work when, for instance, we do training activities and workshops with faculty from around the country. We've been involved in partnerships with NCSES and with UNCF, for instance, to help people develop the skills and capacities to make use of these data and linked NCSES UMETRICS data to try to build just that kind of engagement.
Jason, on a somewhat related note, have you interacted with the Alliance for Hispanic Serving Research Universities? Those are 21 R1 schools that are also HSI.
Yeah, we have had light conversations with them, but we have not yet interacted with them. We've had light conversations with some of their members, and obviously many of our members are also members of that organization. We have not had the kind of institutional partnership yet that we've developed with CPUPC, but that is one group that we think would be a wonderful partner for this kind of effort.